In this video, we're going to learn a more complex example of edge flow. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video for our Fusion Forms Mastery series, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into making a general shape, but we want to talk a little bit more about edge flow and the way that we can carry on specific curvature around a design. Now, this is again another sort of general pod or gauge pod style shape, and what we want to do is we want to learn how we can create something like this using the form tools and really figure out when we need to add more divisions and how we need to control that. So to get started, we're going to begin with a brand new document and start a new form. We're going to begin with a plane or a face. I'm going to select the top for this and just draw a rectangle. Note that I'm going to make my length and width faces 1, so I don't have any additional divisions. From the top, I want to begin sort of making the front edge or the leading edge of my shape. So I'm going to go to Modify. I'm going to begin by scaling this down to be a bit narrower. Then I'm going to scale it out widthwise. From here, I want to take each edge and begin extruding them out. Now, there are a couple things that we can consider here. We can add symmetry at this point, but we're not quite ready for that. Or we can use some other techniques. But the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to use Control to select both of these because I'm on a PC. You can use Command on a Mac. And then I want to hold down the Alt key and bring those down. Now, notice that we're looking at a smooth display. So Alt and 1 or Option on a Mac and 1 will take us into box display. Before we deselect those edges, we're going to use the scale option to essentially scale them away from each other. So that's one benefit of using this sort of workflow is that we're not really dealing with symmetry yet, but using these tools like scale will allow us to get things where they need to be. Next, from a right view, I'm going to use Alt again, and I'm going to just extrude those down. And again, I'm going to scale them out just a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is build this sort of general shape. And again, box display and smooth display. You can see that when we look at this in smooth display, it doesn't really give the shape that I'm going for. So the way that we can get that is at this stage, I want to take each of these upper corners and I'm going to add a beveled edge. I'm going to use 0.05 and I'm going to add 2 segments to that. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So right click and repeat. Make sure that we're having 2 segments. And now when we go to our smooth display, you can see that what we've done is we've captured a tighter corner, then we've got sort of this gradual transition here. This is the stage where I want to break this thing up. And one of the benefits that we have is we can select an edge, we can go to Insert Edge, and then we can set this value to 0.5, which will go directly in the middle of that face. So it's going to go exactly in between both of those edges. And this will help us later when we look at symmetry. Then I want to select that, modify. I'm going to go back to my right view. And I'm just going to pull this up a little bit to give it a slight arc. So at this point in time, I want to make sure that we go back to box display and look at this from the top. So we've created the shape that we are looking for from the front, but now we need to take it backwards. So again, we have to be careful with how much detail we add and at what point. If we're really looking to control a shape, we can do it very broadly at first and then add more detail where we need later. So I'm going to double click this back face. In this case, back edge. I'm going to hold down Alt and just simply extrude this back. Now before I get too far, I'm going to scale this down and then we need to rotate it and we need to look at it from a side view. In this case, front or back with how I drew this. I'm going to take everything here and I'm going to begin scaling it. Now, a couple things happen when we scale it here. It's going to begin pushing these divisions closer together. So this is one of the reasons why we have to be careful when we begin adding too much detail too soon. Because scale in this case is not going to help us actually get the edge or the crease to look right. So I'm going to use Control Z to undo the scale. Then I'm going to rotate this around a little bit. It's going to be kind of hard to see. But really what I want to do is I want to bring everything from the top down. So if I box select, you'll notice that it grabs those upper edges. I have to get everything that I want to move inside of that box select, and then I can use Control to deselect anything that's extra. Now, from this view, I'm going to begin pulling this down. A couple things happen here. It's moving everything with the exception of this edge. It's sort of shrinking that down. So we have to be extremely careful to make sure that what we want to happen is actually happening. So from the top, it still looks good. From the left, right, or back, that's where we really need to be careful. So this is looking okay so far. So we'll double click again and we're going to extrude it one more time. Once again, I want this entire thing to come down. So I'm just going to do a box drag. I'm going to use just the vertical arrow. And again, what we're looking for is a smooth transition. Here's where things are going to start to get tricky because we also need to select everything and we're going to scale it this way. Okay, and again, from the top or another view, we want to make sure that we have that nice smooth transition. Let's take a quick pause and look at this in smooth display. Using Control or Command 4 on the keyboard, we can get rid of those edges. And that looks pretty good. We've got a nice crease that's following the curve that we're looking at. And I'm pretty happy with the results so far. We are far from done, but the next thing that I want to do is I want to begin to add symmetry. So I'm going to select Mirror Internal and just simply select two faces across my mirror line. Now anything I do to this side will be carried over to this side. Make sure that we're back in box display. And I'm going to begin with just this bottom edge. I'm going to go back to Modify. I'm going to go to my top view, hold down Alt, and begin extruding this out. We're going to begin creating the back of the gauge. This is going to begin to get tricky for us because we're trying to maintain those four-sided patches. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we carry this geometry over and we actually are going to try to match the number of divisions that we have here. So I'm going to use Alt on the keyboard and I'm just going to begin pulling them out, let go of Alt, create another one, let go again, and bring this one over. Before I get too far, let's go ahead and weld these together with Modify and Weld Vertices. I'm going to just pick those two and pick these two, and we should automatically have that symmetry line there. So everything looks good. We do want to bring these two back a bit to maintain the curve or the shape. And then we also want to pull these other ones. Again, we have symmetry. So when we look at this from the top, we can use a box select and we can grab the edges that we want by using that box select. All right, that looks pretty good so far. And then I want to take this bottom vertex and I want to pull it back as well. And when we're doing this, what we really want to accomplish at this point is we want to make sure that we recognize that this bottom edge is sort of outside of the rest of the geometry. If we rotate this around, you can see that didn't really translate here. So I want to take these bottom edges and simply just pull them back. Okay? Doesn't have to be perfect, but at this point we just want to make sure that we're getting the shape right. You can also see that there is a potential issue that we're having right here, and we can usually see this in box display, but I'm going to double click this edge and I'm just going to move it down slightly. And then I'm going to double click this one, and then I want to move this one over and down just slightly. Now, again, we're just going to transition back and forth between showing and hiding those edges, and then just sort of rotating it around to see what that looks like. Happy so far. Let's go back to a box display. And now we need to figure out how we're going to connect everything, how we're going to put all these pieces together. And this is where it's tricky because in reality, we don't want this crease to carry down to the bottom. We want it to go around the back and over. But remember, we're trying to maintain those four-sided faces. So when we think about this, a couple different ways that we can do it is we can begin extruding down, and we can also begin extruding over. I'm going to start by selecting these two faces, and it's important, these two edges. It's important that we select both, otherwise they're not going to be welded in the center. Then from a side view, hold down Alt, bring this back, keeping in mind that these edges are going to carry and then they're going to wrap around. So once I get to this point, I'm going to grab this vertex, and I'm going to bring it up. The reason I'm going to do that is because I want these edges to carry down to this point and then over. Then I want to select it again. I'm going to hold down Alt, make that first small division, make the second one, and then this one can carry all the way down. Now it's not quite in the right place yet, but that's okay. We're going to deal with that in a second. Let's go ahead and go to our weld vertices. I'm going to bring this, actually, you know what? Let's hit cancel and then let's restart that. I want to bring this vertex out to this one. I'm happy with that location. And I'm going to say okay there. Then from this back view, I need to actually begin pulling these edges in. So modify, edit form. If I double click that, you can see that it grabs the entire loop. One thing that we can do is we can use our selection options to grow or shrink the selection. But depending on what your options are, in this case, whether you're doing vertices or edges, it can be a little tricky. You have to sort of pick and plan, and you need to increase or decrease the loop. So for me, the best thing is just to select all of these, and then I'm going to rotate it and then pull it back until I'm happy with the width at this point. And then I can go into my weld vertices. So again, we're going to bring this one up to here. We'll say okay. Now what we want to do is, let's see if we can take a look at this in smooth display. What we're seeing here is the center is not merged or welded together. So that's one of those problems that we get sometimes and we need to fix. So I'm going to go to Merge Edge. I'm going to select these three here, if it'll let me. You can see it won't. So another trick that we can do is we can go into Repair Body and we can look at this weld tolerance here. So if I reduce that, or I guess increase it, let's make it larger. Let's go ahead and make it 0.9 millimeters. And we allow it to repair. You can see that it is able to sort of weld that together. All right, so now we have a welded center. We have symmetry still. We want to carry that curve around. So in box display, you'll notice that because of that tolerance, that big tolerance I added, it actually took one of these edges and put it together. So we need to add another one back using insert point. So we'll just come from here to here. Say okay, and now we've divided it up again. The next thing we need to do is we need to bring all of this together. Now, right now at this point, it's not very clean. And what we really need to do is we need to take some of this geometry down and some of it over in order to get the shape that we're looking for. Now, at any point in time in the design, we can decide if we have too many or too few edges. For example, if I think it's going to be easier to just delete these at this point and add them later, that's a very valid option. So if we just get rid of all those, you can see it goes back to a single face. Then it'll let us go to a tool like Modify Bridge. I can take these two edges. I can come down to these two, and I can say I want a single face, and that's because we've only got one face here and one face here. I'm going to say OK, and now it's carried that curvature down. You'll notice that we're left with a triangular patch here. Now, obviously, that's not something that we want. A way that we can get around that is by dividing this up more. This is something we've talked about in other videos, or by simply welding some vertices together. So if we go to our Weld Vertices tool, we can bring this vertex to here and bring this vertex to here. And now we've turned this into a four-sided face. This one here has 1, 2, 3, and 4 sides. Even though it doesn't quite look like it, we do still have 4 sides. When we go to our smooth display and we hide our edges, you can see that we were able to take that curve and carry it down to the bottom. But we want to change the direction. We want it to go this way. And this is one of those big challenges that we come across whenever we're working in forms like this. So what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to take this crease and simply carry it around the gauge where we want it. Before I get too carried away with that, I do want to spend a little bit of time and I want to clean some of this up. So one thing that we're always aiming for whenever we're creating designs like this is to really work on consistency with the layout. We want to make sure that the distance between each of these vertices or edges is consistent, and we want to try to keep them parallel or at least tapering down at a consistent rate whenever possible. So that doesn't matter if you're looking at it from the top or the side, but you want to try to aim for that as your goal. So that looks pretty good. When we go into smooth display, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with the curvature there. You can see that we're getting a little bit of bunching here. And if we rotate this around, you can see that this dips down and then goes back up. Now that typically happens because this edge is likely not high enough or this edge is too low. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that these edges are not simply straight across. Otherwise, that means that we just have too much control there. So what I want to do is I'm going to double click on that and I'm actually going to delete it. I'm going to completely get rid of it. Take a look at this in smooth display and make sure that we still have some sort of crease there. That looks pretty good. It's not as drastic as it was before, but it still looks pretty good. Then I want to, again, get my shape as close to the final shape as possible. So I'm going to take both of these edges and I'm going to begin bringing them forward. Again, going back and forth between smooth display or potentially even the second option, which allows us to see that box display with the underlying smooth. And then I want to make sure that the width between these two stays consistent again. Now we can also be tapering them. We can have them get closer together or farther apart. It just depends on the design intent. But in this case, I want to keep it fairly consistent. You will notice that they're wider in this view than they are in the side. So that tells us that we've got a little bit of space here. Now that we have this taken care of, I'm going to double click on this edge. I'm going to Control deselect that. And then I want to add a bevel. So I want to select those, add a bevel. I'm going to add 2, and again 0.05, and I'm going to say OK. And let's take a look at this in smooth display. Control 4 to get rid of that edge. And you can see that what we did was we tried to change the direction of that curve. We're not done yet because we actually have to manipulate the location of it. When we just add a bevel, it's not like a one size fits all for our problems. So we need to do some manual modifications. From the side, want to make sure that we grab those 3 edges and we bring them down. By bringing them down, what I'm doing is I am lessening the effect over here. And then I'm going to double click that edge completely and bring it up. And then I'm going to double click the one in the middle. Notice that that goes all the way around. I need to only take care of it here. So I'm going to manually select that by holding down Control or Command, keeping in mind that we've got this small lip in the front. And now what we're looking to do is we're going to move it into a position that makes sense. So we want to carry that curvature. Again, going back and forth between smooth display will help. So you can see that looks pretty good here, but it kind of falls apart back here. So we need to spend some time making sure that this works. We'll do that from a side view, double click the middle mouse wheel, and what we need to do is we need to take this edge and we need to bring it back, and we'll take this one and bring it back as well. And then we need to deal with this intersection here, which is going to come from our top view. So let's go to a top view, double click the middle mouse wheel, zoom in, and then I'm going to take these and I'm going to take this as well. I'm just going to pull this out. I'm going to take this one and pull it out. So let's go to our smooth display, Control 4 to get rid of the edges, and let's just see what this looks like. So it's looking pretty good. We're carrying that curve down, but there's still some problems in these edges. Now, if you run into problems in edges, sometimes it's a good idea to just go ahead and run utilities, see if there are any problems that we can fix, maybe star points that could be T-points. Sometimes it's a good idea to run the make uniform utility if we have a lot of star points. It can help clear those up. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to manually modify some of these edges. Now, in a lot of cases, you don't need this many divisions. So we can double click on the center and delete it, then go back to our smooth display and see if that gets us a little bit closer to our end result. Again, Control or Command 4. We're still carrying the crease around the back, but what we need to do is we need it to taper or sort of die off here. Now, there are 2 options that we have. Those 2 options are to create a T-point, which we can do in Fusion. We can simply get rid of one of these edges and just assume that we don't need that there. That can work. In some cases, it's fine. In other cases, it's not. So I don't want to use it as a Band-Aid. The other option we have is to begin sort of gradually tapering this away. So we're going to do this first with this edge. We're going to pull it over to the side. We're going to view this from the top and make sure that we're not drastically changing the shape here. We're going to pull that in. Then we're going to take this vertex, keeping in mind that generally I'm either working in a single direction or I'm working in plane. I'm never moving these in 3 dimensions at once. It's a lot easier for us to control them in 2. So I'm going to take this vertex, and from the side I'm going to pull it down. I want this to gradually taper away. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at it from the front and the side and the top, and I'm watching the distance or the width between these edges gradually increase. Now, again, that's true from the top. We're seeing them gradually increase, so I could take this entire edge and move it. And again, from the back as well. So what we want to see here is we want to see these gradually increase. Let's go ahead and just take a look at this in smooth display. Controller Command 4. And now you can see that it's starting to fade away, and we've got that crease where we want it. Still needs a little bit of work. We can see that edge, which means that if we go into our box display and we show our edges, that we need to spend a little bit more time working here. We need to make sure that all of these are 4-sided, and in some cases it might be good for us to add more divisions. Now, in order to maintain a tight crease, these will have to be a lot closer together. But again, that really just depends on your design intent. I'm pretty happy with the results. We do have a star point here. So if we go into repair body, you can see that this is a section where we either have 3 or 5 edges terminating. And really what we're looking for is going to be 4. So if we want to change these, sometimes you can click on them and it'll recalculate the surfaces. And sometimes that'll be enough to fix it for you. So again, Controller Command 4. And that gives us the look that I'm going for. It's not perfect, but it still has that transition around the back. And from all the angles, we can see that it's carrying. We could do some more work in these corners and spread it out. But this is a pretty good result. And remember, at this point, in order to get that crease to be tighter, we could add an additional bevel. We could come in and we could push those edges closer together. If we just go in and we add a single bevel, and we take a look at it in smooth display, Controller Command 4, you can see now we've sort of created this double edge, that double feature. If we bring those edges back and we do the same thing on this other one here, we add a single bevel. Again, 0.05, pretty tight, Controller Command 4. You can see now we've sort of added this double. But again, that is not a fix-all solution. The bevel only really works in some cases if you already have a nice transition. If you're adding it to a section where it's sort of flat already, so these faces are fairly flat, the best thing to do is to try out your options. So for example, we could try Insert Edge, but notice that it's not carrying around this loop. We can still do a 0.05 Insert Edge, but it's going to create a T point in that corner. You can see that just sort of dead ends here. Then if we want that to carry on, we need to manually sort of create this 4-sided patch. And I'm going to come over to here. And I know this is a triangle here, but what we need to do is we need to insert another point. And we can do that right in the middle. And then we have the ability to move that vertex around. And once we insert that point, then we can come back. We can make a 4-sided patch here. And then we can do it one more time. And we can carry this down maybe to the middle here and turn that into a 4-sided patch as well. So again, we're trying to maintain these 4 sides, but it can be pretty tricky, especially when we try to use some of those tools like Insert Edge. They don't work in all cases. You can see that created a really tight corner here, but it's carrying down and it's not really the geometry I want. So in order to get that stuff to work out, you need to spend a lot of time figuring out exactly what you need your layout to be. In this case, it's going to be a lot easier for us to just manipulate the curves. So I'm going to play around with this just a little bit more. I want to tighten this up from this view. Then I'm going to go to this view from the back. I'm going to double click this. I want to move this over, tighten it up. And then probably need to bring this vertex in. View it from the side. We don't want this to sort of be hanging out in space like that. And then sort of take a look at the rest of it. So now in smooth display, Control or Command 4, it's going to be a tighter crease. So just keep in mind, this takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, but playing around with shapes like this, which are relatively simple, at least at the start, can give you a good idea about when you want to begin adding your shapes, when you want to begin increasing the resolution, and what you really need in order to control that curve. As we look at this design, this is the ring or the loop that's controlling that curve, that's controlling that edge. And then this one here across the front is controlling the front of the gauge. And this one here is controlling the shape around the back. The rest of the stuff here is filler. The rest of the stuff here in the middle is filler. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter in terms of getting the shape correct. But these are the faces that we're using to control this design. So this little lip right here, this shape around the back, that shape around the front. Those are the main things that you need to focus on to help control this design. From here, I would suggest that you continue to play around with this. If you want to alter the shape, then go ahead and add some more edges and detail and try to control them. And always remember, if you get into a situation where you're not happy with the results, double click on those edges, delete them, and just start over. So if you feel like you're just getting a little too far away and the geometry is really hard to control, just delete some edges, go back to an easier to control shape, and then add those edges back in when you're ready for them. So as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.